how do those get played out? So that's another thing. But I think the thing to take away from Murdoch at this point is simply, Augustine has this wonderful lines that what binds us together are the bonds of imperfection. And Murdoch turns it on its head, and it's actually these imperfections which tear us apart. And that's really the question, is to look and begin to think of Christian moral theology as working with this institution called the church, which is bound together by the bonds of imperfection. And that's the challenge, I think, of Christian ethics, is how do we use our imperfections in ways that bind us together and not tear us apart. All right, questions or comments? Okay, now stick with this for over the next few weeks. My job is not to lead you in clarity. My job is to lead you as deeply into the fog as possible. And at the end, then if the fog breaks, it's an act of grace, which is always the case. And I mean that seriously. I mean, it's not simply because I enjoy, well, actually I do enjoy the fog. I grew up in the beach, but anyway. My job is to help you see the complexity of it. But keep in mind this, you don't stay mired into complexity. There are two forms of simplicity. There is a simplicity that never deals with the complexity, and I have no use for that. But there is a simplicity that comes on the other side of complexity, which is where we're at, what we are headed. But you've really got to deal with complexity to get to that simplicity. Simplicity of choice. All right. Well, yes.
The student, when you was telling this story.
Yeah, Ludwig.
Sir?
Ludwig?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I started thinking about Snowden.
Snowden?
Yes.
How so?
In the sense that Snowden believed that the NSA was wrong, so he was willing to, well, to me, he's willing to give up his citizenship in order to bring more evidence to the wrongfulness of the NSA.
Right. Snowden's a very interesting case. And okay, it's one thing to say, okay, here I think the NSA is wrong. I have the information. I'm going to disclose it. I'm going to hightail it out of the country and seek asylum elsewhere. Mm-hmm. What would you have thought if Snowden said, I have the information, the NSA is wrong, I'm revealing this information, and have my day in court? I mean, if truth is costly, then is Snowden trying to avoid the consequences of his truthful act?
Because there's still a matter of the law.
Yes.
Because you can be right and still be wrong. Hey.
Right. I mean, if you are doing something that you believe to be for the sake of truth,
And for the good.
for good, then spending time in jail is no dishonor.
So, in that case, should James Clapper spend time in jail for when he said what he thought was the truth, but it was a lie? The NIA director. So should he also spend time in jail? I'm no fan of Snowden.
Right.
But at the same time, you got Snowden, you have James Clapper. Both of them did similar things. One just did something as being an overseer of the NSA, and then the other one did something as just being a contractor for the NSA.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I mean, it's it's a question of saying, look, and I'm not really saying necessarily that Snowden did the right or wrong thing or what he did. All I'm saying is, if you believe that something is ordered to what is good and true, then what does it mean to take responsibility for the act that you committed? And it seems to me that one could argue in Snowden's case, basically what he did was toss a grenade and run. Now, you could also argue saying, well, but why should something, if it's really wrong what the NSA is doing, why should he be doing it? It's a reply back to that argument, and that's where you're trying to sort out.
And is he not paying the consequence for his action? I mean, you got to go to a different country, you got to leave your fiance, you got to leave your family. So are you not paying the consequence for your action?
It's not the same as spending time there.
What are you? Well, I don't know. They can come visit me in the United States very quick, quicker than they can come visit me in Russia.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, again, the only reason I'm raising, I think what's interesting about Snowden is it does raise the question of what does it mean to take responsibility for acting. I mean, basically, what he's saying is, I'm not willing to pay the price of potentially becoming a criminal, being tried to be a criminal. Well, but if you really want to disclose that the NSA is wrong, then that disclosure then means you're willing to suffer the consequences for revealing what that is. I mean, I don't know. It's something that needs to be talked about.
I mean, if the guy wants the truth to come out in whatever way, he does that, if that's the ultimate thing, if it's like, doesn't matter if it's illegal, it's what's moral, then do it. And if you want to be a coward and run away, or if you want to protect yourself and run away, or whatever your feelings are as well, it seems like he just thought it was the right thing to do and decided how he would handle the backlash of that as well. You really don't have any idea what he thinks about something versus whether it's moral at the same time as illegal.
Well, yeah, and I think I mean, basically we don't know the full range, but we also don't know, for all we know, he could have sold this information. There could be information that we don't know that he hasn't, maybe, or he's just given it. But there's a lot of other things that go into this.
He's one who's able to access the information to do what he wants.
Any other questions, comments? Yeah.
Well, it sounds to me like sometimes we try to come up with what those consequences should be as a societal answer, when in reality it sounds like it's more of a personal. I mean, what could be as a negative consequence to me might not be so much for Steve, or maybe my ties with my family aren't as bad, and so I wouldn't mind being in jail. But and I think that's what the struggle is here, that we're trying to find what's the one answer for this one issue, but it comes down to an individual. Would that be safe to say?
Well, I think what you begin to look at again when you're, because the first thing you do when you think about these moral issues and these ethical questions is to say, okay, the first task is descriptive rather than judgmental. What the question that H. Richard Niebuhr used to ask, what is going on? So you try to do it as best yourself to give an accurate description. This is what you get. But then you also begin asking, saying, you raise the question that it's one thing to take an action that just affects me. It's another thing to take actions which affect others. And how do they begin to play into the decision itself? For example, it would be one thing just to endanger myself. It would be quite another matter to say I'm volunteering my class to endanger themselves in the same way. Or if I did something, an act that would have consequences for other people, how do I give account? Now the problem is almost every decision made is going to affect someone else. And that's eventually, at the end of the day, you have to say, it's worth it. It's good that I do this even though there may be negative consequences for others. Because this is how I align myself with what I really do.
And for me, that's probably the greater issue of what we walked away from as a society, that sense of community and that sense of what I do theocracy standpoint, why God has to be in the authority that guides us as humanity in how we live this out. Because if we are left in of ourselves, we are by nature selfish.
Right, and I think it gets to be, and we'll get on in a second, the politics, we're going to look at this. It's like, for example, how do I love my neighbor? And particularly in a situation where war is at stake. Now, within the Christian tradition, one could make this argument that when I become a Christian, I renounce the right of self-protection. When there's a strand in the tradition that argues this. However, I also take on a stronger obligation to protect my neighbor. So if Bernard's going to attack me, I can't defend myself. If Bernard's going to attack you, however, I'm under a moral obligation to protect you. So the question then becomes, we engage in just wars, not to protect ourselves, but to protect those neighbors which are under threat. And that becomes then a very different question than what constitutes a just war. Now, again, we are not going to be able to accord, because I have Christian friends who would say that they are under an absolute command of Christ, and under no circumstances, even in the protection of the neighbor, can they take another life to do that. So there's that fundamental argument then, is how is the love of neighbor best exhibited, particularly if you believe that the command of Christ forbids you from doing violence to others. Or another question we'll ask in the economic sphere is, for example, let's say I'm an investor. Do I invest in jobs in neighbors who are in closest proximity to where I am, or someplace else across the world where it may actually create more employment than it would here? Do I have a stronger obligation? To which neighbor am I hold stronger? And how do I best exhibit that love? So that's the question. Again, it doesn't get you off track with what theology is at the beginning point. It's not, I mean, in the Bible, if you can look all you want, it's not going to tell you, should I do in vitro fertilization or not. What it is going to help you think about is, what does it mean to bring children into the world? And how should that inform then your moral assessment of something like in vitro fertilization?
It's just a couple things that kind of popped up in this part of the discussion about striving to be in relationship with God, bringing about the most good. Two things: can we be good without God? And what about when wars are deeply entrenched in religion? When people could claim that God is the reason that they are at war?
Can you be good without God? I've met good people who don't believe in God. I believe it could be better if they did. Sure, religion can be an excuse to go to war. But that's why the Christian tradition has a good sense to eventually reject the option of crusade and engage in crusades, but it never endorsed it. Religion should be a restraint upon violence and not a justification.
Is it usually?
Pardon?
Do you feel like it is usually, or has been historically?
Oh, history made a lot of mistakes. But again, you're dealing with the realm of the possible. I mean, Constantine gets a really bad rap. Okay. The church went to hell when Constantine becomes a Christian. Well, when you look at what Constantine, what did he do? He outlawed the gladiatorial games. He stopped animal sacrifice in public occasions. He stopped infanticide, made it illegal. His pagan critics were constantly complaining that he showed mercy to criminals too long. Now, did he use Christianity for his own self-interest? Yes. Did he do a lot of bad things as a Christian? Yes. But what would you have preferred? No, I don't think so. So that's, I mean, and that's where I think always begins asking these questions is what can actually be changed. And it's not going to, it's usually not going to be perfect. Yeah.
Just additional questions as far as can you be good without God? Does not believing in God mean you're without God?
Oh, I mean, not doing doesn't mean no. I mean, no, God is no way. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. It's that the greatest act of despair you can do is to say it's God's world. No, it's still God's world. Yeah. So you, yeah, I mean, it is sort of, I mean, I love that prayer of St. Paul, you know, we pray for them because they'll be heaping coals of fire. You just can't.
Well, thinking of Winter's question too, and kind of, not kind of, but coming from a more pluralistic perspective, is the goodness of Yahweh, God, different from / better than the goodness that a person may be perceived to have with a different deity? Because I mean, when you're interacting with individuals who are either from another monotheistic tradition, I mean, even outside of, I mean, granted, we've got the big three, and we sometimes operate from a mindset that those three are one and the same, depending on where we're coming from. But when we get into other faith traditions and other deities and other pantheons, then how does goodness work into those? And how do we acknowledge that goodness?
Well, there again, I think it ought not to surprise us that other people know something about the good, the true, and the beautiful, because we don't have a monopoly on it. I think just upfront admit that. The question that becomes, though, is that are we all talking about the same thing but from different perspectives? Or are there multiple good truths and beautiful, I mean, even syntax doesn't work.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's the former, then you have a possibility of, I think, greater conversation. It's clarifying, it's not just mutually exclusive. If there's multiple, then you really can talk past each other.
But can multiple, just because there are multiple good truths, does that mean that they are inherently contradictory? Can they simply be, does a truth, a good truth, have to be whole, holistic, fully complete for it to be good? Or can...
Well, I think this is an argument between the ancients and the modern.
Okay.
The ancients would argue that truth, beauty, and goodness are singular,
Okay.
whereas I think late moderns want to say it's multiple.
And I think an even better one is, I know I think the truth, for me, there are truths that are absolute. And there are those who argue that truth is not absolute because it's contingent on perspective.
Right. But I mean, even if you're going to, okay, even if you believe in, okay, let's say we do believe in absolute truth, we cannot know with absolute clarity. Therefore, we have to be modest about what we think that truth might be, and that we may have it wrong. But I think what you're saying is an important thing, to give up on the notion that there is something, capital T, truth, then means we are simply, as late moderns, simply left with a will. The truth is what we will it to be. And that's the problem we're going to be looking at with teaching, because he saw that with great clarity, and that's what we're headed. And that presents a whole different set of problems, because then ethics becomes primarily discourse about power.
Seems like a lot of this comes down to application and how we apply what we understand as the great truths or beauty. You know, we can say, well, these are what I know to be absolute truths, but then we get in trouble when you have a culture that goes into the land of another culture and brings them the absolute truth and says, we're going to make sure you know that you now know what the absolute truth is as we see it. So it's like, once again,
Well, I mean, part of the tradition is also taught, but we tended to neglect it, has been, we may also take delight in that which is different. That's there in the tradition. This has not received significant attention. And the reason we take delight in it because it's part of God's creation. And God didn't create John. So, and simply, I mean, something may remain always foreign and different to me. I mean, I only pretend to understand it. I can still take delight in it. I may scratch my head a lot about it, but I can still take delight. And I think that that's one of the other interesting things that we're going to be looking at is that even something that seems so positive, like empathy, unless it's grounded in a kind of moral context, can actually be a very bad thing. An empathetic person would make an excellent torturer. An empathetic person would also make a very good swindler and con artist. So unless empathy is tied with other moral commitments, God spare me from empathetic people. And that's again where we have to always say is that just because something exists like empathy doesn't really mean it's necessarily good unless it's placed into a different context. And it's the same thing with the whole notion about differences and things like that. I mean, one of the words you won't hear me use very often is diversity. The word I prefer is pluriformity. Plural expression. Because, again, Augustine would be horrified by the slogan on our coins. Out of the many, one. He would say, no. Out of the one, many. All right, any further questions, comments?
you didn't make up that word, did you? That's a real word, pluriformity.
I didn't make it
I'm just checking. It's about to be Googled.
up. I think my supervisor made it up.
There it is.
Is there?
Yeah,
Did
it's
it make the
there.
dictionary?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Well, it's Wiktionary, so.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Dictionary in Catholic culture. It's on there too. Start that.
All right, well, I will see you next week, and get ready to tackle what is the reading for next week. Oh, by the way, and you all got the final version of the syllabus? Okay. Okay, so next week, if you haven't started as your bureau, start that, and we'll be reading Turtle next week.